Hello everyone, welcome to Chapter 1 channel. Today I'm going to talk about a movie named Target. I hope that you enjoy. Spoilers ahead. The first scene of the film shows the internet world, where everyone appears to be completely lost in their phones. In the midst of all, we meet Lee, a young man who uses Target, a website that sells used things. Despite the fact that he does not directly know the woman, Lee is setting up a sale for his old laptop. It soon becomes apparent that in return for cash, he intends to send her the laptop. The protagonist, So-on, who manages an office in a corporate company, enters the scene. Her employer chastises her and gives her some of the labor duties because she is correcting the employees for their errors. At this point, we learn that the boss harbors romantic feelings for So-on. During lunch, So-on discusses her broken washing machine with her colleague, Ju. Struggling with money, So-on receives a suggestion from Ju to check out the Target website, where she could purchase a second-hand washing machine at an affordable price. Meanwhile, Lee, the young man from earlier, receives a message from the female seller. She informs him that her brother will pick up the laptop. Moments later, a mysterious man appears at Lee's door, stabs him multiple times, and kills him. The man turns out to be a serial killer who targets victims through the Target website. After killing his victims, the killer lists their belongings for sale on the site in order to profit from them. The killer is revealed to deceive victims by pretending to be a buyer and then killing them once they meet. So-on, unfortunately, becomes the next victim of this vicious cycle. She finds a second-hand washing machine on the Target platform, contacts the seller, and arranges to buy it. When the machine arrives and is installed, it turns out to be a broken, useless item. Furious, So-on tries to reach the seller, but he doesn't answer. Feeling defrauded, So-on chooses to call the police to report the event. At first, detectives Na and Ju minimize the case, but they pledge to find the con artist. When So-on returns home, she looks through the seller's profile and finds that the seller is linked to Lee's murder because it includes the same old laptop that Lee had attempted to sell. So-on warns others in the comments to avoid dealing with this person, stating that she's filed a police report. The killer, however, becomes aware of So-on's actions. It turns out he has a sophisticated hacking system that allows him to track down her personal information online. The next day at work, So-on notices that her boss's tone and mannerisms resemble those of a scammer, leading her to suspect him as the culprit. Later that day, So-on is bombarded with scam calls and messages from unknown numbers. The serial killer has posted So-on's details on various sites, causing her phone to ring non-stop as people respond to these fake advertisements. To make matters worse, that night, multiple delivery men show up at her door with goods she never ordered. Han becomes increasingly certain that the scammer now knows her address. The next morning, as she heads out to work, she leaves a note on her door warning delivery people not to come, threatening to call the police if they do. Later, Han, feeling that the scammer has gone too far, visits the police station, urging them to investigate the situation immediately. The detectives reassure her that they are on the case. That evening, Han goes out with her friend Ju, and they have a few drinks. When Han returns home, she notices that the serial killer has been watching her from a distance. The following day, a mechanic arrives, claiming he needs to check the water sprinklers at her place. This seems odd since her sprinklers were fine, but Han doesn't give it much thought and leaves for work. Later, she receives a strange message from her brother, suddenly asking for money. When she tries to call him, his phone is off. It becomes clear that the killer has been impersonating her brother to ask for money. That night, Han hears a noise at her door. When she checks, the electric lock opens by itself, and a man suddenly appears, asking if she is the woman he paid to be with. Han realizes that the killer has hacked her electric lock and is now sending random men to her apartment. Terrified, she calls the police, causing the man to flee. Soon after, she receives a text from an unknown number saying, "I'm coming to meet you in 5 minutes." Panicked, Han sets a timer for 5 minutes, and when the time is up, the door unlocks again. A new man appears, but before anything can happen, Detective Ju arrives just in time to arrest him. It turns out the man was only there for the same reason as the previous one. He had been given her address by an unknown person. Because he is sick of playing games, the murderer calls Han that night and threatens her, saying that her death is approaching. She tells the cops because she is afraid. The cops eventually find the killer's hiding place after a lengthy examination. Other for a deep freezer in the corner, they discover nothing within. They are appalled to find Lee's body when they open it, demonstrating that this was his house. The fact that they are dealing with a serial killer dawns on them. It is also revealed that the mechanic who checked her water sprinklers was actually the killer. He had planted a camera inside the sprinkler to spy on her. Later, Han feels like someone has entered her apartment, so she checks every room, but finds nothing unusual. The next day, the killer follows Hun to her home. When her boss arrives at her apartment to apologize for his behavior, she refuses to let him in, suspecting he might be the scammer. Despite her protests, he tries to force his way in, and in the struggle, she accidentally injures his hand while shutting the door. Inside, she finds that her bathroom has been disturbed, as if someone had just used it, and food is scattered in the kitchen as if someone had cooked there. Then, her computer turns on by itself, displaying the message, "Today you came home early." Terrified, she immediately contacts the police. When the detectives arrive, they find no fingerprints, suggesting the killer is highly skilled at covering his tracks. The harassment continues as the killer calls Hun again, telling her he knows her bank details. Moments later, she finds all the money in her account has been withdrawn, pushing her to the brink of madness. The case takes a more serious turn as the detectives intensify their efforts. One day, Detective Ju is waiting outside Hun's apartment, hoping to catch the killer. The killer suddenly breaks the detective's car window and knocks him unconscious. He pulls out a knife, intending to kill Ju, but hesitates when he hears a noise nearby. He then heads toward Hun's apartment, determined to kill her that night. At the same time, Hun's boss arrives at her place to apologize for his earlier actions. The boss believes that Hun is linked with this man when he sees the killer, who is dressed casually. He becomes enraged and begins insulting him. When the boss is brutally stabbed during a battle, the murderer kills him. The murderer had already entered the apartment and concealed the body by the time Hun gets back. Unaware of what has happened, Hun unwinds on the couch. When she sees the flickering lights of a camera inside the water sprinkler, she realizes something is strange. She begins inspecting every sprinkler out of suspicion, wondering if the murderer has installed cameras throughout the flat. As she inspects the sprinklers, she makes a horrifying discovery: the body of her boss, hidden in a corner. Just as she realizes what's happened, the door opens behind her, and the killer is standing right there. He immediately attacks Hun, knocking her unconscious. Meanwhile, Detective Ju regains consciousness, and Detective Na arrives at the scene. The two detectives follow the killer's car, where Hun is being held captive. They race through narrow streets, but suddenly, Detective Na's car is hit by a truck, critically injuring him. The collision also causes the killer's car to flip. Despite his injuries, the killer manages to escape. After the crash, both Hun and Detective Na are rushed to the hospital. Hun recovers in a few days, but sadly, Detective Na succumbs to his injuries. Upon hearing the news of his partner's death, Hun falls into a deep depression, feeling responsible for the deaths that have occurred because of her. After being discharged, she devises a plan to catch the serial killer once and for all. She teams up with Detective Ju and they come up with a scheme to expose him. They create a fake profile on the target website, pretending to be a girl, and upload a picture to lure the killer in. The killer soon contacts the fake profile, asking to meet for a product exchange. Hun disguises herself and goes to meet him, but she senses that the killer might have caught on to their plan. She excuses herself to the bathroom and quickly calls Detective Ju. Unfortunately, the killer attacks her from behind, knocking her unconscious and abducting her. He takes her to his office building, where he waits for the detectives to arrive. When Hun regains consciousness, she manages to lock herself on a balcony. She calls Detective Ju to tell him where she is. The killer, however, breaks through the window with an axe just as he's about to kill her. Luckily, Detective Ju arrives just in time, and a brutal fight ensues between him and the killer. Both men stab each other with knives as they struggle for control. Meanwhile, Hun finds an automatic nail gun and drives a nail into the killer, but he still doesn't die. He then turns his anger on her, nearly stabbing her to death. The murderer nearly kills Hun in a last-ditch battle, but Detective Ju attacks him from behind. Both of them fall from the balcony and hit the automobile below. The battle goes on even after the fall. The murderer's reign of terror comes to an end when Hun holds him back long enough for Detective Ju to strangle him. With the killer dead, the case is solved, and after a few days, Hun returns to her normal life. However, the traumatic experience leaves her with a deeper understanding of the dangers lurking in the online world. So, this was the movie named Target. Subscribe to my channel for more movie. Thank you everyone. Take care. See you soon.